HZBN.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we discuss the story of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners. Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. Two quick announcements before we get on with today's episode. Firstly, a very humble and sincere request to all our listeners. If you've listened to the show for a long time and enjoy the show, please do kindly leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're not an Apple Podcast user, definitely do share the podcast with your friends and family who might like and appreciate the content. Thank you. On the podcast today, we have a poet and author, Mihir Vatsa, talk to us about his happy place, Hazaribagh, a Plateau town in Jharkhand. As a part of this episode, we're giving away a couple of copies of Mihir's book to our listeners. All you have to do is listen to the episode and answer 3 simple questions. They're linked in the show notes section, so make sure to listen in and stand a chance to win a copy of Mihir's book. Good luck, and let's get on with today's episode now.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome author, award-winning poet, and a self-confessed river walker, Mihir Vatsa. Hi Mihir, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast, and quite a bio to have, I must say. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Welcome.
Hello, Saf, and it's a pleasure to be with you and in conversation with you. I've listened to the podcast many episodes, especially the one on Bastar that you did, and it's not a region that is particularly looked at so often. So I was very happy to find the mention of Bastar in your podcast, and plenty of other episodes too. They're all very, very engaging. So it's a pleasure for me as well to be in conversation with you, and I look forward to it.
No, thank you, Mihir. Thank you for those kind words. And it's totally kudos to people like you, great authors, writers, travelers like you that agree to come onto the podcast and share not just the popular places that everybody knows of, but also these little hidden gems within India, right? So it's great that we actually get to experience those places virtually at least and get inspired by some of them. And we also do have one such very interesting place to discuss on the podcast today. And like I was telling, Mihir is an author and author of this wonderful book called as Tales of Hazaribagh, an intimate exploration of the Chotanagpur Plateau. So really looking forward to discussing that as well, Mihir. But before we kind of jump into the conversation, the introduction I gave about you is very, very brief and concise. So why don't you speak a little bit more about you, the poet in you, the author, as well as the river walker?
Sure, certainly. Hi, I am Mihir Vatsa, and I am the author of Tales of Hazaribagh, an intimate exploration of Chotanagpur Plateau. I belong to Jharkhand, specifically the town of Hazaribagh, and I call this town as a plateau town because it is located on top of the Chotanagpur Plateau. It's one of those towns which in a way embody the essence of the plateau landscape. I am currently a PhD candidate at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. The work that I am doing there is a kind of a continuation of what I have done before, which is, so previously I was working as a landscape photographer, as a writer, even while engaging with the subject, which was the plateau. And now I'm engaging with my subject as a researcher, and hopefully something good will come out of it after 4 years. I call myself a river walker. I understand that it's a very poetic term, and I shamelessly use it. I think I coined it, and it happened one fine day that I just woke up and I realized that this is pretty much what I do. I walk along with, on, in rivers. So why not call myself a river walker? And that's how this whole term came about. But I'm very proud of that term, actually. and I feel very happy whenever I introduce myself as a river walker.
Absolutely. Certainly, from what I've got out of the book as well by reading through it, it does give an insight into your personality, your connectedness to the earth, if I may say so, right? To the land, to your hometown. All of that is really brilliantly portrayed in the book as well, and really looking forward to sharing that with our listeners as well. But before we jump into the conversation itself, can you tell us a little bit more about the orientation of the place as well? Because we've used Hazaribagh and the Chotanagpur Plateau quite a bit because it's a part of the title of the book as well. But just to set context for our listeners a little bit, could you please call out where these places are and how one can get to Hazaribagh in the first place, just given its geography?
Sure. So just a crash course here. So Hazaribagh is in this Indian state of Jharkhand.
Right.
The nearest airport is Ranchi, the capital of Jharkhand. The nearest railway station is Koderma, which is 60 kilometers from Hazaribagh. Hazaribagh has now its own railway station, but express and mail trains do not run yet. So we still prefer going to Koderma or Ranchi to take trains or flights. Hazaribagh is around an overnight journey from Calcutta. The GT road, the Grand Trunk Road, it passes through a portion of the district, if not the main town itself, but through a portion of the district which is in the north. Beyond Hazaribagh is the district of Koderma, which is still in Jharkhand, and after Koderma you come to Bihar. And when you travel onwards from Koderma, then you come to places like Rajgir, Nalanda, and then Patna. So that's on the north side. On the south side, as you travel from Hazaribagh, you come to the end of Jharkhand and enter Odisha. From the north side, you arrive from West Bengal, and then you enter Jharkhand near Dhanbad, and you leave Dhanbad, and then around 3 hours later you are in Hazaribagh. Hazaribagh is located at an altitude of not quite high, but still quite humble, an altitude of 615 meters. That will translate to around 2020 feet. And therefore, Hazaribagh was always a favorite with people who would live along the Gangetic plains, people of Bihar, Bengal, because there the heat is quite pressing. And they would come to Hazaribagh, and they still do, in order to get some respite from the harsh summers that plains experience. And this was how the tradition of traveling to Hazaribagh also started. It started with the British.
Yep.
And at that time, the capital of India was Calcutta, which was the East India Company's capital. And the new capital, Delhi, it only became capital in 1911. So from the incoming of the East India Company till 1911, Calcutta was the capital. And because Calcutta was quite near from this plateau, I wouldn't say town, because town came much later, but because Calcutta was closer to the plateau, the soldiers who would be traveling along the Grand Trunk Road, they would make their stop at what would later become Hazaribagh, because they enjoyed the climate so much. It was always pleasant, never humid. We do get some sort of summer feels during May, and the heat has increased in the recent years, but still it is much better climate than the surrounding, the places that are on lower altitude.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for calling that out. And like you said, it kind of served as, even for the homesick East India Company and its soldiers, right? It served as a piece of solace, just reviving memories of back home for them. Just the good weather conditions, and like you've called it in the book, the celebrity of the place, right?
Yes,
That kind of bode well for them. So it has been kind of, yeah, not exactly a hill station, but close cousin of,
close
you could
enough.
say.
Yeah, close
Yeah,
cousin of
exactly.
hill station. Because sometimes I feel, Sir, that Hazaribagh was one of your first tourist places in India,
Yeah.
because the concept of hill station came into being after 1857. So Shimla emerged later. But Hazaribagh, the history of traveling to Hazaribagh, the plateau itself, it goes back to like 1770 to 1780. And even though the tourism was different, not in the sense that we understand it now, but just people coming to the plateau in order to spend some time here before they knew that they would be going into the heat again. So that made Hazaribagh quite a lovable place for them, and for me also.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just in terms of the name of the place as well, Mihir, I mean, rough translation would break it up into maybe a place of 1,000 gardens. But I don't know if there is any connection to that as to how the name of the place came into being. Would you know?
So there are theories, like there are three predominant theories. First is, of course, how the name appears, which is the land of 1,000 gardens. Uh, Earlier, when we had tigers in the forest, then it would be the land of 1,000 tigers, because you have H near the end. Officially, that H has been removed, kind of in a tacit agreement or acknowledgement of the lack of tigers that we now don't have.
Right.
So, but I keep that H because it's a way of honoring history. So, so these are the two interpretations. First, the land of 1,000 gardens, and the
Right.
second, the land of 1,000 tigers.
Right.
The third, which is more localized, is that there used to be this village called Hazari. Before Hazaribagh town happened, there used to be this village called Hazari, and there used to be this village called Okni. So the first map, one of the first maps, around 1786, drawn by Major James Rennell, also known as father of modern cartography. So he located what is presently Hazaribagh, and he named it on the map as Okun Hazari, combining the names of the two villages, Okni and Hazari.
I see. Okay.
But and the other story is that there used to be a mango grove, a grove of mango trees near this village of Hazari. So that might be understood as a bagh in itself. So one theory is this as well, that there was a grove of mango trees near the village of Hazari, which would later become Hazaribagh.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for kind of specifying some of those as well, and beautifully setting us the context for where the area in general, right? Not just the town of Hazaribagh, but the Chotanagpur Plateau as well is located. Now, just jumping into your return, right? Your return back home. It was a homecoming of sorts. Can you please talk to us a little bit about the different places or the different like a lot of this is around your love for nature, right? Trying to get and understand and explore your surroundings much more. So, just in those terms, how you've kind of very nicely broken it up in the book as well, calling out the different hills, the lakes, waterfalls, rivers of the region. Can you please kind of shed some light and focus on those places or those areas as well in the town, around the town, that are of note and that have been called out so beautifully in the book?
Sure. So the first part of the question, the return. There is a tradition of books being written where we find solace in extra human presence, and which in this book is nature.
Right.
But by the time the book ends, and by the time I finished writing it, I realized something very crucial, that what nature it gives to me is, as it is spelled out in the epilogue, is the ability to love. And that I think is very important, that of course we all undertake our journeys, and we all go to places. Many of them are natural places, but the specificity of Hazaribagh, because I am a local here, was that it led me from feeling not good enough or feeling loveless towards myself to feeling loving towards myself. And that's one of the ways that nature intervenes, as long as we allow ourselves to see it in that manner. So that is one. And therefore the places that appear in the book would be places that if you would ask a local person from Hazaribagh, they may not identify so much of meaning with those places. Or if you ask, or if anyone who might just be passing through Hazaribagh, they might as well look at Canary Hill, for example. And they might just cross by the hill thinking that, yeah, it's a small little hill. But the meaning that we give to these landmarks or landmass, right, it comes from us. So it also reflects the way in which we are engaging with nature. So first was Canary Hill. That is a place which surely anyone traveling to Hazaribagh should visit, and should try to climb all the stairs up to the top. And especially if it's evening time, then you'll be able to see the entire town, glittering below the hill. So that's one. The other very prominent landmark is the lake, and the lake is where I also live, and just beside the lake. And the lake has its own history. The book specifies that history, and it's a history that is tied with colonial violence, because the lake emerged from the construction of the jail. So the jail was constructed, the earth was dug out in order to supply raw material for the construction. And what all that digging left behind were 3 craters. And those 3 craters were later filled with water, engineered in a very specific way so as to form water steps. So one lake is situated on a slightly higher level than the other, and then the other is situated on a slightly higher level than the third one, so that if one lake floods in the rain, then the excess of water comes down to the second lake, and then that goes to the third lake, and from there it goes as a thin, very slim stream, all the way joining in the north of Hazaribagh with the Sivani River. The third is the forest, but of course plenty of forest around. There is one small patch of forest near Canary Hill. So if someone is coming into town and they don't have much time, and they would just want to take a feel of the forest, they should go to the forest of Canary Hill. Then there is the forest of the wildlife sanctuary, the Hazaribagh Wildlife Sanctuary, which in one mythical past was Hazaribagh National Park.
Right.
So the book talks about it. I won't share the details, spoiler. But yeah, in one mythical past it was Hazaribagh National Park, but presently it is Hazaribagh Wildlife Sanctuary. You may visit it to see deer, you may visit it to see animals, or you just like me, you visit it for no purpose as such, but just to be with the trees and with the forest and just to walk around, so that the wildlife sanctuary is the third. Then fourth, we have plenty of waterfalls. So there is one waterfall inside wildlife sanctuary, which is Salperni waterfall. And that was my first waterfall that I so-called found on my own, even though I'm pretty sure that it was already found, and because it is in the wildlife sanctuary, so people have gone there before, but I found it intuitively, so that's why I lay claim on that discovery. And similarly, there are plenty of other waterfalls too. Outside of the wildlife sanctuary, there is something called Tiger Fall, And its story is also very curious. It was once a very pretty, pristine place, which has now been turned into a mine. And yet, some element of that waterfall is still there. It's a very curious way of looking at landscape, where the industrial landscape and the natural landscape, they have fused together to create a very strange kind of definition of nature. So when we approach Hazaribagh through such kind of thinking, then it suddenly begins to make sense, and then it opens up. There are plenty of hot springs also. So the one hot spring, perhaps hottest in Asia, that's the claim that we laid. That is in Suraj Kund, which is on the Grand Trunk Road. And there is another hot spring, which is not that hot, but hot enough, around 25 to 30 kilometers west of Hazaribagh. It is called Balbal. There are rock formations, a gorgeous rock formation site where the river has cut through a block of rock in just wonderful geometry. It's at this place called Tandava. And yeah, just there are plenty of rivers also. So if anyone is a river walker like me, then they could just opt to follow a river. And because Plateau, the logic of Plateau is that it has to fall. Somewhere it has to fall, right? And the rivers which flow along the plateau, on the plateau, and because plateau is going to fall, then the rivers will also fall. And there you will find your waterfall. That's the logic. You just follow the river, and somewhere the plateau will fall, and there the water will also fall. So around 12 waterfalls in and around Hazaribagh. The map at the front of the book, it has marked some of those places, and I have left certain places unmarked for the reader to come and just discover. To come with that sense of wonder to a place which is not so much written about, which is still virgin in some sense. So you enter this place and you can cultivate your own wonder here. And that is very important, just to visit some place which can provide you with that sense of wonder.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's also very, I think, heartening to see. Literally, you kind of take out Google Maps, explore
Yes.
things, or go hunting for things based off of their location or their coordinates. And with your, obviously, from time to time with different friends as well. That's also kind of very nicely portrayed in the book, how you connect with different friends, their little backgrounds, etc. And obviously, your partner all along, which is your trusted alto, right? Your
Alto, yes.
driving buddy. So all of that is, I think, beautifully captured, and it gives that sense of exploration, right? Like you said, for somebody passing by a lake or a hill might not mean too much. Obviously, it's picturesque and everything, but beyond that, you don't think too much about it. But you've kind of beautifully, almost I'd say, humanized or personified that place, right? What's its history?
Yeah.
How does it look? Why are these formations, or why is it in a certain way as well? You've gone into the depths of those as well, and just a sense of exploration as well, like just going about a place, reading up about it. That's also great, because I think in a lot of instances, you speaking with some of the folks who've been around in the town in Hazaribagh for a longer time. One, for example, is Bulu uncle, right?
Yes,
That's something
yes.
I found really great, like your conversations with him and learning from him, and then trying to explore either with him or by yourself or with another friend. Such things also have been like really beautifully captured, and it kind of just adds that sense of adventure as well. You don't know how it'll end up, if you'll end up finding the thing that you're out looking for or not. The interactions you have in the meanwhile with locals, all of that is beautifully captured. And there was also a couple of interesting places that have been called out at a high level. I don't know if you want to touch upon those as well, Mihir. One I found really interesting was I think it's called the Hava Mahal, right? From the king of Ramgarh. Yeah, Ramgarh.
Yes. The story of Hawa Mahal is is something that evokes a kind of sadness. That how can a palace fall upon ruin? So the Hawa Mahal is part of the larger. There are two buildings. First is the Padma Palace, and Padma Palace is the main residential building of the kingdom. And the second is Hawa Mahal, which is just which comes a bit before you reach the Padma Palace. And Hawa Mahal was built for the queens. That's what the lore says, that it was the palace of queens. And it's a wonderful palace because first, not only in terms of architecture, but also in terms of its location, because it's located near just next to a thin river, and there are bathing tanks which you can still see even though it is in ruins. Everything is in ruins, and it was unfortunate for me and people of my generation to be born at a time when the palace went into decay, because our introduction to royalty happened through this idea of decay. Unlike people in Rajasthan, say for example, who take pride in their palaces, and rightly so, because they are so well maintained. Here, the royalty does not exist anymore, and therefore even the notional prince that we have, not the actual prince, but in the title, so to say. So the prince that we have and the family that we still have, they also have assimilated into the common population. So they are not particularly rich in order to undertake such an extensive repair or renovation project. So the building is just left to decay, and I was very surprised to find, Saf, that one of the, like you have enterprising photographers. So and because we went into lockdown,
Right.
suddenly pre-wedding photo shoots started happening in Hazaribagh, and the Padma Palace, along with the Hawa Mahal, they became one of their favorite haunts to stage such photo shoots. Now, I can go into interpretation of such photos, because against the backdrop of ruin, I don't know what kind of wedding that might turn out to be, but that is just my literature brain overanalyzing. But on an aesthetic level, that the entire palace complex has been resurrected back to utility again, if not for the royal purpose, but for the commoners, and who still manage to find some beauty in ruins. And I think that's what life is, pretty much, that it will give you plenty of hardships and challenges, and you have to find your light somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. But yeah, like I think a little bit of a standout, because like you kind of called out in the book as well, a lot of it is surrounded by nature and a lot of these wonderful lakes, hills, rivers, and whatnot. But yeah, I found this little monument tucked in there as just as a kind of reminder from the past, or the past glory of the place as well, right? The kings or whoever ruled that place as well. So that was a little unique in the way. But yeah, let's take a quick commercial break here, and we'll be right back on the other side.
Do you find yourself making routines and timetables but never actually being able to stick to them? Do you find yourself downloading productivity apps only to uninstall them in a few weeks? In that case, you've reached the right place. Hi, my name is Ashtin Doctor, and I host the Habit Coach podcast, a podcast that helps you get all of this in order, set better routines, and make better habits. And now, we're coming up in a Kannada adaptation as well. Make sure to check it out every Monday and Thursday on the IVM Podcast Network or on all major podcast streaming platforms.
All right, we are back from the commercial break and in conversation with Mihir Vatsa. Mihir, we've been talking about the topography of Hazaribagh, as well as some unique places within the town or in the vicinity of the town. And another unique place is this place called as the Karanpura Valley, right? Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Karanpura Valley, very interesting place. Very interesting place because, again, a place of conflict. The idea that coal is embedded within the land of Karanpura Valley, that was already floated in the colonial times. But for the longest of time, the mining had not started. And at least I took the beauty of Karanpura Valley. So Karanpura Valley is in south of Hazaribagh town. Around it starts around 28 kilometers from Hazaribagh, and it's a long, just as the word says, valley. It's a long valley, low altitude, below Hazaribagh town, below the plateau, and it extends around roughly 40 kilometers in length. So, and there the coal was already there, and it was surveyed during the colonial time as well. But they started mining very recently. They started mining as recently as 2012, 2014. So people like me, I personally, I took the beauty for granted, because I thought that, yeah, it's a beautiful place and nothing is going to change here. And in small towns, nothing seems to change, you know. So I also thought that, yeah, nothing will change, and but unfortunately it did. So a place which once was heavily forested, very, very beautiful, splendidly picturesque, is now home to plenty of mines. And it pains me whenever I go to Badkagaon, which is one of the towns in the valley, and see that instead of instead of the forest that used to bring me to Badkagaon, now the forest is still there, but the entire trees and leaves are coated in coal dust. So first the sensory experience has changed, the visuals have changed already, and what was initially a very nice picturesque drive, now you find these mining trucks just grunting on the road. So apart from visuals, the auditory experience has also changed. But still, I mean, mining is happening, it's kind of a reality. Can't do much about it, but still there are places that mines have so far spared, and that's why I think the book becomes a bit important, because it functions as also a kind of documentation of these places. So say, for example, there is a rock art site,
Right.
which dates back to around 10,000 BC.
Yeah.
And it's one of your very primitive rock art sites in India. So thankfully, no mining is happening near it. I mean, in the immediate vicinity of it. But the overarching presence of mining is still registered even there. That we are aware that just 10 kilometers ahead or 15 kilometers ahead, there are proposed mines, and they perhaps might start functioning later in 10 years or 20 years, but they might just. There is a very curious place called Birsa. So if I can translate it into English, then it will mean like rainfall.
Right.
So it's kind of a cave, a shallow cave, not a deep cave, a shallow cave where it's very stupid actually. so you go inside the cave and you clap and you say Birsa Pani, and the water droplets which are there condensed on the roof of the cave, they drop because of the frequency, sound frequency, and that brings much thrill to us. A simple scientific explanation to all of this, but still, because Birsa Pani, the name and the story behind it, that you go there, you clap, or you say Birsa, or you shout Birsa Pani, and then the Pani will rain on you. So that is a, but regardless of the silliness, because that place is so much invested with myth and love, so it's one of the loved places in Hazaribagh. And there are again waterfalls in the Karanpura Valley as well. There are 4 rock cut caves belonging probably to the Buddhist period, in a major hill range which is called Mahudi Hill. So there are 4 rock cut caves there, and they are worthy of being preserved, because we don't get rock cut caves so much in Jharkhand.
Sure.
In Maharashtra, Janta Ellora, of course, they are of
Right.
a very grand scale. But these are small caves and yet important caves, something that one should look after. So archaeologically very fertile, that land. Agriculturally very fertile, land of 47 rivers, people say. This Karanpura Valley, small and big rivers. And fertile also in sense of imagination, and unfortunately now also in sense of coal. So yeah, very interesting place, Karanpura Valley.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's such a rich history, also, right? Like you said, almost what is it? Around 10,000 BC is when those
Yeah.
rock art, is present there. So very unique, right? You don't really find that in a lot of places, even within the country.
And
yeah?
Seth, like I was talking about Padma Palace before, right? So the kingdom of Ramgarh Raj, which we call it, and it wasn't a kingdom; it was zamindari estate. So they were like big landowners. And local people started revering them as kings. Raja they would call them Raja. But it wasn't a princely state, so to say. It was a zamindari estate. But that zamindari estate, its history also begins with Karanpura Valley, because their first capitals, the first 2 capitals at least, were located in that valley, and we have ruins there as well of the there is something called Badam Fort, and it was constructed in the second half. It was constructed somewhere in 1600s. My estimate is like 1640 to 1660, but I might be wrong. Probably the same time when Shah Jahan was the ruler of Agra and Delhi. So we have our own Taj Mahal, so to say, in this the ruin of Badam Fort, and there is a very nice story to go by that, and I think this story doesn't appear in the book, but if I may take the liberty for exclusive airing of this story on this podcast, so it's a very romantic story. The king, Raja Dalel Singh, he was the king at the time, and he had married a woman, probably from what is now Bihar, probably from the plains. And after marrying, they moved to this place called Badam, and they built a fort. I can't call it a palace, but there was construction. It seems to me like it was a fort. Even only the gateway is what that remains today. So they constructed a fort. They started living there, and the book refers to this wild rose bush that they planted in front of the fort. So that wild rose bush is still flowering. So that's one thing. The other thing is that this rock art which I referred to,
right,
adjacent to that rock art site is a huge cave. It's an uncharted cave system. I think an exploration is due, but there is a huge cave there, and a little stream flows through that cave. And locals would say that in one of the crevices inside the rock, that is a place where married women would come and offer their prayers to the god, and in our case, God Shiva. So the story goes that one day the queen went to this cave to offer her prayers to Shiva, and something happened where she drowned. And she didn't return to the fort. And when she didn't return, and when the message was brought back to the fort to Raja Dalil Singh, then he was so heartbroken at the loss of his queen that he forsook Badam altogether. He abandoned the fort altogether and just shifted the capital around 40 kilometers from the present Badam site. So that's a very it's a romance which I think Hazaribagh's people have inherited, and the one evidence of that romance is the flowering rose bush, which is still present in that village, in the village of Badam.
Yeah. Wonderful, and thank you for some exclusive content on the podcast as well. Hopefully, whenever you're writing your next book or as a part of your research, this finds mentioned somewhere. But yeah, really good to actually know about these things as well, because India is a land of a lot of folklore and a lot of history, right? It's always great to kind of dig deep and find out a little bit more about them, because we, in this day and age, we are living side by side with places that have had rich histories, unfortunately without knowing much about them. So some sense of
Yes.
effort is needed to get to that, and thank you for actually doing that work for the rest of us also, to kind of learn a little bit more about our own place, our own backyard, right? So that's really important. But one important thing you also brought up while you were touching upon the Karanpura Valley, right, Mihir, is the realities that we have to live with, right? And mining
Yes.
being one of them. And similar to that as well, just in terms of because of some of the places, given the remoteness of the nature of the place as well, right? A lot of them are very remote as well. There might be some places in terms of just safety and security of traveling to such places.
Yeah.
What is your general? Obviously, you're a local, so you know the area. You could perhaps know the language also beyond Hindi. But in terms of safety, because I know you've made some mentions within the book as well, right? Mamajis, is that the
Yes.
slang, Mihir?
Yes.
But
Yes,
yeah, I'd love if
Mamaji.
you kind of touch upon Mamajis as well.
So, I think for the past 2 decades, I think even more than that, but I can speak of the past 2 decades because that's what I remember. Jharkhand has been a sensitive place in terms of the Naxal insurgency.
Right.
And not only Jharkhand, but this you find in Chhattisgarh also, and continuing to Andhra Pradesh, some parts of Karnataka still. So this is what the Indian state would call the red zone,
Sure.
red corridor. And Hazaribagh for the longest time was part of this red corridor. And I think that this is one of the ways in which places ended up becoming mythicized because of the remoteness, and if not remoteness, then the sheer amount of perceived danger that was attributed to these places. Thankfully, Hazaribagh is much safer now because as the Chief Secretary of Jharkhand mentioned in one of his recent interviews, he referred to this Naxal insurgency, and he identified two major pockets where the insurgency is still active, and none of these two major pockets is in Hazaribagh. So that's one relief. But even besides that, I think that what stops us from venturing into the forest, sometimes thankfully so that we don't litter, but more so as an impediment to venturing out into the forest, is the legacy of the fear. It is not the fear itself, but that legacy, the history of the fear. And that legacy has done a very profound kind of violence upon Jharkhand. I may speak of, say, going to a national park in the United States or Canada. The fear of nature is primary, because you enter sheer wilderness. Here, the fear of nature becomes secondary. Here that legacy of fear, it creeps in. And to think about it, it's a unique kind of violence which man has done upon nature. Man has done upon man, yes, but upon nature as well.
Right.
So my fear of nature will always be overshadowed by the fear of the mamajis. Even though mamajis are not really there anymore. There was one instance where I thought that the person coming from the opposite direction might have been a Naxali because he was carrying a gun and wearing camouflage. But and I was with a junior of mine, Vinayak, who also appears in the book. So I just told Vinayak that, Vinayak, listen, don't do anything. Just mind your own path. And I'm pretty sure that he will also not do anything. And this is what happened, that we were deep in the forest and we just stuck to our trail and we crossed that man. And he also didn't bother us. We didn't bother him. And even today, like that identity, whether he was actually a Naxalite or whether he was just a forest guard, who knows? I later learned that forest guards are not given rifles, so it points towards the former possibility. But there is something seductive about not finalizing. It might just be, we may never know who that person was, and that's okay. So I would say that yes, the kind of places I went to, some of them were extremely remote. Like I'll be very upfront and honest about it. And these are not places where your casual traveler should go to. And yet there are plenty of places in Hazaribagh where even the most casual traveler can easily go. They can, because the roads are there and they take you right to the waterfall. There is one waterfall called Konar waterfall. And it's perhaps the widest of all the waterfalls in Hazaribagh, and the road will take you to right at the the face of the waterfall, so to say. So there you don't encounter any danger as such, because you are not straying off your roads. The kind of journeys that I undertook, they were more or less that kind of straying. Where I would go into places which were not particularly touristy or not defined as such, not defined as a tourist spot, So to anyone who is coming to Jharkhand now, I would say that please do come. It is not like you hear stories of Bastar, Jagdalpur, and there is that legacy of fear operating there as well. But I'm pretty sure that Chitrakoot waterfall is safe,
Sure.
as safe as you would find Goa safe or Shimla safe. Because there has been investment by the state government and by all stakeholders to make these places safe for travelers.
Yeah, definitely. And to some of those offbeat and off the grid places, you can always travel vicariously with Mihir through his books and through his works.
Sure,
That way,
sure.
you can definitely manage to see them virtually, even if not perhaps physically. The beautiful way in which you portray it actually perhaps is the next best thing one could do rather than visiting the place itself, right? So thank you so much. And yes, just to before we forget, as a part of this episode, as a part of the podcast as well, we'll be doing a giveaway of a few copies of Mihir's book as well to some lucky winners. So watch out for the show notes and the announcement at the beginning of the podcast, and make sure you participate in it to get to grab a copy of Mihir's book. But yeah, Mihir, thank you so much. You've so wonderfully captured and like in a sense helped us. One, for a newbie, for somebody, for an outsider, you've helped us discover this hidden gem within India, right? Because you've helped us also look beyond just Ranchi and Dhoni in Jharkhand. That's what a lot of laypersons would associate Jharkhand to. So thank you so much for opening that for us. And also in one way, for yourself, right? You too have rediscovered this place of sorts. So
Yes.
that journey is also that much more heartening and beautiful, and is wonderfully captured in the book. I keep repeating, but it is well. It's where the praise is well deserved. So definitely, people, I encourage you, whoever's listening, to check out Mihir's book. But as we start to kind of wrap this up, Mihir, any final thoughts about Hazaribagh or about just travel in general that you'd like to call out?
I think that And just the remark that you made previously, that if there's someone who wants to vicariously travel in thick of the nature, then they could either read my book. And the one more addition that I would add here is that they could not think of themselves as travelers. They could think of themselves as dwellers. To dwell, to live in a particular place. So when say for example, when we live in Delhi, we live knowing the dangers of air pollution, of being shot at for lack of parking space. So silly things happen there as well. But do we stop dwelling? No, we don't, because in some ways that is our home. So similarly, as long as you approach a place as a traveler, then it means that the transiency is inbuilt, because a traveler will travel. That's their prerogative. But once you start dwelling, and I think this book is as much as about travel as it is about dwelling, that you make that place your own for a brief moment of time, or forever in my case. So once you start dwelling, then you're free to enter as much deeply into nature as you want, because as a dweller you will be sympathetic towards nature. Then nature will become a part of your interiority, your own self, and that is very important, especially in the context of climate change, where we cannot ignore it. Right? It's upon us. It's already there. And first is that we can either fetishize nature as a product, as a commodity which we want to go to and we make use of, or we could essentialize nature within ourselves and recognize that there is what's that movie, Rockstar? And there is Ranbir Kapoor singing that I am also nature. So that outside of that song, but in larger practice, and this I think is an ethical practice in today's day and age. It's a kind of an ethical mode of traveling and also dwelling. So this is my last thought, and something that I would leave all the listeners listening to us to dwell upon.
Some wonderful words there, and it's so deep as well in a way, because like you said, with traveling, or with the word traveler, there is that sense of transience, which also, I guess, to some extent makes up for the lack of responsibility or lack of owning or lack of dwelling in that place, right? So you have to look beyond just that and think about the overarching impact of certain actions as well, right? Just own up, right? Whatever you do, own up and think about it, not just from a short-term or a medium-term perspective, but even from a longer-term perspective. So thank you so much for firstly coming onto the podcast, and like I said, more importantly, shining some light on this wonderful gem of a place through your prose. And it's almost poetic. That's how it is. It's very simple, earnest, sincere. That's one of the things that I kind of felt when I was reading the book, and I'd definitely like our listeners also to check out and experience the joy of going to a place, the joy of adventure, and that's just the joy of living and finding out more about your surroundings, right? That's what it is at the end of the day, the love of nature and finding out and the curiosity to learn more about nature. Thank you so much, Mihir. It was really a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Saf, and thank you for all your wonderful words that you just had for my book. It's heartwarming to know that you enjoyed the book, and hopefully everyone does. So that was very nice to hear. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's very well deserved. Thank you, Mihir. We'll keep in touch. That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. you can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by filmmaker and screenwriter Leena Yadav. She is the creator behind the acclaimed true crime Netflix series, House of Secrets, The Burari Deaths. It's a great episode, do check it out. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by Lakshmi Tasaka, co-founder of Slay Coffee. They share a pretty interesting theory about coffee and share 4 ways to inculcate the coffee habit into your lives. We have Siddesh Gautam with us on Audio Gyan. Kedar talks to Siddesh about his aesthetics and the kinds of colors he uses in his artworks. On Non-Curry, Sadaf and Archit explore the world of besan, which can be cooked in both sweet and savory forms. And the Legend of the Month episode on the Fighting Goat is back. Arjun and Somesh talk about UFC's longest reigning champion, Anderson Silva. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, do remember that many of our shows are available on YouTube. You can check that out by going to our website, ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where we have a list of all of our various YouTube channels. Finally, we'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, HDFC Mutual Fund, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy? If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.